Would you hand over $1 or would you offer something far more valuable? Barron's decision to stop and talk over one small request ignited a journey of empathy, change, and lasting impact. The streets of New York City were alive with the usual energy that only a place like this could produce. Tourists roamed in packs, their eyes wide with awe as they snapped pictures of towering skyscrapers, while the locals, with their heads down and a sense of purpose in their stride, hurried past. The hum of traffic mingled with the laughter of street performers, and the faint smell of hot dogs and pretzels filled the air. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the city pulsed with the rhythm of 1,000 different lives colliding in one place. Barron Trump walked through the crowd with his family, his tall figure looming slightly above them. His mother and father, though famous, were as relaxed as they could be in such a public space, enjoying the fleeting anonymity the city sometimes offered. The conversation between them was light and easy, a moment of normalcy amidst the whirlwind of Barron's life. But Barron felt the familiar weight of being in the public eye, an ever-present force that seemed to push against his every step. He caught the curious glances of passers-by who recognized him, the whispers that trailed in his wake, the weight of expectation in every encounter. As they approached a busy intersection, he slowed his pace and looked at the bustling streets ahead. "I'll catch up with you," Barron said, glancing back at his family. His voice was soft, but the need for solitude was clear in his tone. Without waiting for a response, he slipped away from the group and turned down a quieter side street. The noise of the city faded slightly as he put distance between himself and the crowd, the sidewalk now more open, his footsteps echoing off the buildings that lined the street. Barron allowed himself a moment to breathe, taking in the sights around him. A street artist painting portraits on the corner, a couple laughing at a small cafe, the vibrant colors of street vendors' carts. Yet despite the vibrancy of the city, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper he was missing. He had always been aware of how his life was different. The world seemed to view him through a lens of assumptions. His wealth, his last name, the public eye that had followed him from the moment he was born. Sometimes it felt as though the world expected him to play a role, to be something other than just Barron. The weight of these expectations had become a familiar presence in his life, and today, as he walked the streets of New York alone, it felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the quiet of the side street or the pull of something unspoken, but Barron couldn't help but feel the world pressing in on him more than ever before. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice that cut through the ambient sounds of the street. "Hey, can you give me $1?" Barron's head snapped to the side. The voice was raw, tinged with both desperation and hope. On the corner of the sidewalk, sitting on a worn blanket, was a man in his 50s. His clothes were ragged, his hair unkempt, and his face was weathered by years of hardship. He looked up at Barron, his eyes tired but still hopeful, waiting for the response. For a brief moment, Barron stood frozen, his mind processing the simplicity of the request. The homeless man wasn't asking for much, just a single dollar. It was a stark contrast to the demands of his everyday life, where people often wanted more from him than money. He could give the man $1. It would be easy. A quick transaction, a fleeting gesture, and Barron could continue his walk, his family none the wiser. But something about the moment stopped him. The man's gaze was steady, his presence unexpected. Barron could feel the internal tug, the decision to just hand over the dollar and move on, or to stop, to engage, to perhaps learn something more. He felt his hand instinctively reach for his pocket, but then it paused. Barron stared at the man for a moment longer, sensing something deeper beneath the surface. This was more than just a request for money. There was a story here, one that he couldn't ignore, a story that perhaps the world had forgotten or overlooked in its rush to move forward. Barron's internal conflict began to rise. He had been taught to be practical, to understand the boundaries between himself and others, especially those who came from such different walks of life. Yet in this moment, he didn't feel like the son of a billionaire, a person with all the privileges that came with that title. He just felt human. With a deep breath, Barron made a choice. He wouldn't just hand over $1 and continue on his way. He would stop. He would listen. He would give this man something more than what he had asked for, something that might be more valuable than money, his time. And so, Barron took a step forward, his thoughts now quieted by the decision to engage. He was no longer walking past the man, but toward him, uncertain of where the conversation would lead, but certain that this moment, this encounter, was about to change the direction of his day, and perhaps in some ways his life. Barron stood in front of the homeless man, the weight of the moment pressing on him. The man's worn face and weathered clothes were a stark contrast to the polished, upscale world Barron usually inhabited. But something about the simplicity of the request, "Can you give me $1?" felt like an invitation to something deeper, something more meaningful. It wasn't just about money, it was about connection. "Now, I can't give you just $1, Barron said, his voice firm yet gentle. "I can give you something more. My time." The words hung in the air, the implication of them lingering longer than expected. The homeless man blinked as though he hadn't quite understood what Barron meant. For a moment, it seemed like the offer might be a fleeting one, a moment of politeness before Barron would turn and walk away. But Barron surprised him again. He didn't just stand there. Instead, he lowered himself carefully to sit down next to the man on the cold, uneven pavement. The movement was simple, but it was profound. Barron's choice to sit, to place himself at the same level as the homeless man, was unexpected. It caused a ripple of surprise among the few onlookers who had gathered. Some paused mid-step, glancing over with curiosity. Others whispered to one another, unsure of what to make of the interaction. Most people would have simply dropped $1 into the man's outstretched hand and gone on their way. But Barron did something different. He chose to engage, to truly see the person in front of him beyond the surface. Jack, the homeless man, looked at Barron, his eyes narrowing slightly in confusion. He had seen all kinds of people pass by, all of them looking down at him, most of them avoiding eye contact, and very few willing to acknowledge his existence. He hadn't expected the young man in front of him to stop, to sit, and to offer something so personal. After a beat, Jack cleared his throat, his voice hesitant. I don't know what to say to that," he muttered, his hands nervously fidgeting with the ragged edges of his jacket. He had no idea what to make of this encounter. People like Barron didn't stop for men like him, not on the streets of New York. Barron smiled gently, his posture relaxed. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "I'm just here to listen." For a few moments there was silence between them, both of them adjusting to the unexpected shift in the dynamic. Barron studied the man beside him, his rough exterior, the deep lines of age and hardship etched into his face, and the quiet sadness in his eyes. But beneath it all, Barron saw something else. He saw a person who had a story, a person who had lived a life just like anyone else, a life that was worthy of being heard. Finally, it was Jack who broke the silence. "I'm Jack," he said softly, his voice rough but sincere. He shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his own story pressing on him. "And I guess I ended up here the same way most people do. A combination of things. I wasn't always like this." Barron nodded, encouraging him to continue. "What happened?" he asked, his tone gentle but curious. "What led you to this point?" Jack hesitated as though the question was an unwelcome reminder of a past he'd buried long ago. But after a moment he sighed, the breath heavy with years of unspoken pain. "I had a good life once," Jack began. "I worked as a mechanic, had a house, a family. But life has a way of kicking you when you're down. My wife left me after a series of bad decisions. I lost my job when the economy tanked. And before I knew it, I was on the street." His voice faltered, and Barron watched him carefully, not interrupting. He didn't try to offer comfort right away. He just let Jack speak, knowing that sometimes the greatest gift one could give was simply to listen. "People don't realize how easy it is to fall," Jack continued, his eyes distant as he relived the painful memory. "One day everything's fine. You've got a job, a home, you've got a purpose. And then one thing goes wrong, and it's like a domino effect. You lose your job, can't pay the bills, and suddenly you're on the streets. You start making bad decisions, hanging with the wrong crowd, doing things you'd never do if you were in your right mind." He paused and shook his head. "It just gets harder and harder to get back up once you're down." Barron sat quietly, absorbing the weight of Jack's words. He didn't offer any immediate responses, but his face softened with empathy. He could hear the shame in Jack's voice, the helplessness that had taken root after years of struggle. Barron knew that many people would have dismissed Jack's story as just another tale of someone who made poor choices. But Barron was learning that every person had a unique journey, a complicated story that couldn't be understood by just looking at the surface. "I'm sorry that happened to you," Barron said after a long silence, his voice filled with sincerity. "It's not fair. Life can be really unfair sometimes." Jack glanced at Barron, surprised by the genuine compassion in his voice. Most people, he thought, would have just offered a quick apology and moved on. But this young man, this Trump, was different. Barron didn't treat him like a charity case or a nuisance. He treated him like a person, like someone worthy of attention, worthy of respect. "Thanks," Jack muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "Not many people take the time to listen. It's like I'm invisible to most people." Barron nodded, understanding more than Jack could know. It was easy to overlook people like Jack, easy to walk by without really seeing them. In a city like New York, where everyone was rushing somewhere, it was easier to pretend they didn't exist. But Barron wasn't like most people, and Jack was no longer invisible to him. As the conversation continued, Barron found himself asking more questions, not out of a sense of duty or obligation, but out of a genuine desire to understand. He asked about Jack's family, about his dreams before everything had fallen apart, about his hopes for the future. With each question, Jack began to open up more, and Barron listened, not judging, but simply taking in the full scope of the man's life. It was an interaction so rare in the modern world, a moment of human connection, built not on pity or charity, but on mutual respect and understanding. And in that moment, Barron felt something shift inside him. It was as though the weight of his own life, his name, his wealth, the expectations that came with it, had lifted, if only for a while. For once, he wasn't just Barron Trump, the public figure. He was just Barron, sitting beside Jack, sharing in his story. As Barron sat beside Jack, the city around them seemed to fade into the background. The sounds of honking taxis, hurried footsteps, and distant conversations became muffled as the two of them shared in a quiet, unexpected communion. For the first time in a long while, Barron felt as though he was no longer a part of the world that moved so fast around him. Instead, he was here, present in this moment, listening to the story of a man who had been ignored by so many. Jack shifted slightly on the curb, his gaze drifting to the people passing by, most of them glancing at him briefly before continuing on their way. It was a feeling he was all too familiar with, the sensation of being unseen. "You know," Jack began, his voice low, "most people don't even see me. It's like I'm invisible to them." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle between them. Barron didn't interrupt, just watched Jack carefully, his presence open and patient. Jack continued, his voice tinged with both frustration and sadness. "It's like, once you're on the street, you're not a person anymore. You're just something people step over. People don't want to look at you, because if they did, they'd have to face the truth. They'd have to see that life could easily be them one day. And they don't want to think about that. So they just pretend you don't exist." Barron nodded, absorbing the gravity of Jack's words. It wasn't just about money or food. It was about the complete lack of acknowledgement, the complete lack of humanity extended to those who were struggling. Jack's words echoed something Barron had felt in a different way. How people often didn't truly see him either. They saw only the surface, the title, the wealth, the family name, but they didn't see Barron, the person, the individual beneath the public persona. Jack's gaze softened, and he let out a sigh, as though he were weighing the next part of his story carefully. "I've had moments," he said, his voice quieter now. "Moments when I thought I wasn't going to make it, when I thought the darkness would swallow me whole. There are days when the hunger is too much, when the cold seeps into your bones, and the loneliness eats at you. But then there are moments, small moments, where someone notices you. A smile, a kind word, someone letting you sit on a bench for a while. Those moments, They keep you going. They remind you that maybe you're still human, even if the rest of the world has forgotten. Barron could feel the weight of those words in his chest. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about maintaining a sense of self, a sense of dignity, when everything around you was designed to strip that away. Jack's story was one of survival, but it was also a story of hope. The kind of hope that flickered, weak and uncertain, but never fully extinguished. Sometimes it's the smallest things that matter the most, Jack added, his eyes distant. A smile, a kind gesture, someone who doesn't treat you like you're invisible. Those moments are worth more than any dollar I've ever gotten. Barron remained silent for a moment, considering the depths of Jack's words. He had never truly understood, not until now, how powerful a simple act of kindness could be. How it could be a lifeline to someone who had nothing else. He thought about the way the world moved so quickly, how people rushed past each other, caught in their own struggles and ambitions. In that rush, it was easy to overlook the people who were suffering just as much, if not more. Barron's thoughts drifted to his own life. He had been raised in a world where everything seemed to be mapped out for him. Expectations, rules, and a constant spotlight. He was Barron Trump, the son of a public figure, and for most of his life, that was all people saw. It wasn't easy living under that kind of scrutiny. Every move was watched, every word analyzed, and the judgments were harsh. People assumed things about him before they even met him. They assumed he was spoiled, out of touch, immune to the realities of the world. And sometimes, Barron admitted to himself, they were right. Wealth had created distance between him and the world in ways that he hadn't fully understood. It was hard to connect with people when they saw him as an object of fascination or disdain, rather than as someone who just wanted to be seen for who he truly was. He looked over at Jack, who had turned his attention back to the street, his expression distant but still present. Barron's mind shifted back to their conversation, and he felt a spark of understanding that hadn't been there before. Jack, despite everything he had endured, still had a sense of dignity, a quiet strength. He didn't need pity, didn't need sympathy. He just needed to be seen, to be recognized as a person with value. I know what you mean, Barron said softly, drawing Jack's attention back to him. I know how it feels to be misunderstood. People think they know me because of my last name or because of what they see on TV, but they don't know me. They don't know what it's like to be me. And sometimes it feels like no one really sees me for who I am, not just the image they've created in their heads. Jack studied Barron for a moment, his eyes softening. I get that, he said with a quiet understanding. I guess we're not so different after all. Barron nodded. Yeah, maybe not. He paused, the weight of the conversation settling on him. It's crazy, isn't it? How people can be so focused on their own world that they forget that everyone else has a world too, a life, a story. That's the thing, Jack replied. People don't see the stories. They only see what's in front of them. If they looked a little deeper, they'd understand a lot more. If they could see each other, really see each other, they'd realize we're all just people. Not labels, not positions, not roles. Just people. Barron thought about that for a long time. What would the world be like if people truly saw each other, not as categories or statistics, but as individuals with complex stories, emotions, and dreams? What if the focus shifted from the surface to the substance? I think we could change a lot of things if people saw each other that way, Barron said, his voice thoughtful. If we stopped judging based on status or wealth or where we're from and started seeing the person behind it all, maybe we'd understand each other better. Jack nodded, a small, appreciative smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Yeah, maybe that's the answer, right there. Seeing each other for who we really are. For a moment, there was a silence between them, one filled with a quiet understanding that transcended the differences of their lives. They were two people from very different worlds, yet in this moment, they had found something in common, a shared humanity, a recognition that despite the disparities in their circumstances, they were both just people, doing their best to navigate a world that often overlooked the depth of their stories. Barron looked around at the busy street again, but this time he saw it differently. The people passing by weren't just faceless strangers in the blur of the city. They were people with stories, each one complex, each one deserving of attention. And in that moment, Barron made a promise to himself. He would try as much as he could to see people more clearly, to look beyond the surface, and to remember that everyone, no matter their circumstances, had a story worth hearing. As the conversation between Barron and Jack unfolded on the bustling streets of New York City, an unsuspecting bystander quietly filmed the exchange on their phone. The footage capturing the unlikely and powerful interaction between a young man from a prominent family and a homeless individual quickly made its way across social media platforms. Within hours, it had gone viral. The video was simple yet striking, a candid moment of empathy and understanding, with Barron sitting on the curb beside Jack, listening intently to his story. It wasn't a flashy or staged moment. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic speeches, just two people from different walks of life, connecting on a deeply human level. And it resonated with people. The reactions to the video were immediate and varied. Social media was abuzz with comments, debates, and shares. Some skeptics questioned Barron's motives. Was this a publicity stunt? Was he just trying to gain favor with the public? These voices, though loud, were met with a flood of others who saw something different. For many, Barron's decision to sit with Jack and genuinely listen was a rare, refreshing break from the cynicism that often surrounded public figures. It wasn't a display of charity or superiority. It was a display of kindness and humanity. Wow, this is what the world needs, one comment read. Barron Trump showing empathy like this. So much respect for him. Others shared their own stories, reflecting on how rare it was to see people from different social backgrounds truly connect. This gives me hope, another user commented. It's easy to dismiss the homeless, to look away, but Barron didn't. He saw him, he listened. The video quickly became a catalyst for a broader conversation about empathy, kindness, and the treatment of the homeless. People began to shift their perspectives, not just on Barron, but on the larger issue of how society views and interacts with those in need. The footage was discussed in interviews, articles, and even local news segments, all exploring the powerful message of human connection. Many people who had previously viewed Barron through the lens of his family's wealth and fame began to see him in a new light. His willingness to engage with Jack, not as a charity case, but as a person, resonated deeply. It was a reminder that respect, dignity, and understanding should be extended to everyone, regardless of their circumstances. The video sparked a movement of sorts, encouraging people to rethink their approach to others, to look beyond the surface and see the humanity in everyone they met. And for Barron, the experience, shared on a global stage, was a moment of quiet, unexpected transformation. He had gone into that conversation hoping to offer something, but he walked away with something far more meaningful, a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to connect with another person. The viral video capturing the heart of an unexpected encounter between Barron Trump and a homeless man named Jack became more than just an emotional moment. It sparked a wave of positive change for both individuals involved. What began as a simple act of kindness on a busy New York City street soon grew into something that rippled through the broader community, influencing attitudes and leading to tangible improvements in Jack's life. In the days following the viral video's release, something remarkable happened. Local shelters, charities, and social service organizations began reaching out to Jack, motivated by the viral moment, to offer him much-needed help. The visibility of his story, combined with Barron's genuine engagement, provided Jack with a level of attention that he had long since given up expecting. People began to see him, not as a statistic or an afterthought, but as an individual deserving of care and respect. One of the first organizations to make contact was a local shelter that specialized in providing medical care to those in need. They offered Jack a full health screening, something that had been out of his reach for years. Jack had long struggled with a variety of untreated health issues, chronic pain, malnutrition, and untreated injuries. And now, for the first time in a long while, he was receiving the care he desperately needed. "I never thought this would happen to me," Jack said in a follow-up interview. People walk past you every day. They don't even see you. But Barron saw me. And because of that, other people saw me too. Medical care was just the beginning. Local housing programs also reached out, offering Jack temporary shelter while they worked with him to secure long-term housing. What stood out in these efforts was the genuine desire to provide Jack with not just a roof over his head, but the opportunity for a fresh start. Barron, though not seeking the spotlight, quietly facilitated these efforts behind the scenes. His family's connections helped connect Jack with people who could offer the kind of sustainable solutions that go beyond short-term handouts. It was clear that this wasn't just about charity. It was about lifting Jack out of the cycle of homelessness for good. Barron worked closely with social workers and outreach programs, helping coordinate a plan that included job placement services for Jack. He wasn't just offering money, he was using his platform and resources to create lasting change. It wasn't about putting a Band-Aid on Jack's situation. It was about providing him with the tools and support he needed to regain his independence and dignity. In a private moment, Barron reflected on his role in Jack's transformation. "I never expected this to turn into something like this," he said, "but sometimes just listening to someone and offering your time can make a bigger difference than you think. I'm glad to have played a part in helping Jack turn his life around." While Barron's personal involvement in Jack's story was an inspiring outcome, the impact of the viral video spread far beyond one individual. The footage, along with the story of the conversation that led to it, began to spark conversations about homelessness on a larger scale. What started as an emotional, viral moment soon became the catalyst for a broader societal dialogue about the systemic issues that contribute to homelessness and the ways in which communities could address them. A ripple effect began as various organizations, both local and national, started advocating for more sustainable solutions to homelessness. This movement called for a shift in the way society approached the issue, not just through charity, but by addressing the root causes of homelessness. Key organizations pushed for initiatives such as affordable housing, mental health services, addiction recovery programs, and job training opportunities. Barron, who had always been aware of homelessness but hadn't been as deeply involved in the issue, found himself drawn into the broader movement. He began to take a more active role in supporting systemic changes, using his platform and resources to help elevate organizations that were focused on providing long-term solutions. He worked with experts in the field of social justice, policy reform, and mental health to advocate for affordable housing projects, as well as increase funding for mental health services for the homeless population. "It's not just about giving someone a place to sleep for a night or offering a meal," Barron said at a public event addressing homelessness. "It's about providing the support and resources they need to get back on their feet and reintegrate into society. We need to address the mental health challenges, the lack of affordable housing, and the job opportunities that can help break the cycle of homelessness for good." Barron's advocacy highlighted the deeper issues of homelessness, prompting a shift toward long-term solutions rather than temporary fixes. The viral video sparked discussions that led to changes in policies and a focus on addressing the root causes of homelessness. His experience with Jack transformed Barron into an advocate for sustainable solutions, pushing society to view the homeless with respect and dignity. What began as a simple moment evolved into a movement, showing that empathy and human connection can create lasting societal change, making a difference in both individual lives and communities. Barron and Jack continued to meet regularly, building a deep and unexpected friendship. Jack, grateful for Barron's time and kindness, began to turn his life around. With community support and Barron's encouragement, he found a steady job, stable housing, and regained his health. Jack's transformation became a testament to the power of compassion. And Barron, changed by his time with Jack, gained new perspectives on life outside his privileged world. He realized the impact of empathy and how small acts of kindness could create lasting change. Barron became more involved in homelessness initiatives, advocating for affordable housing, job training, and mental health services. Their friendship taught him that true change comes from genuine human connection. Jack's progress continued as he rebuilt his life, becoming a symbol of how compassion can lead to transformation. Barron, proud of his role in Jack's journey, stayed connected and supported him quietly. Jack's story spread, inspiring others to think differently about homelessness. Barron's advocacy grew, using his platform to push for systemic change and raise awareness about homelessness. He worked to create policies that provided long-term solutions, not just temporary fixes. The story ended with Barron's reflection. A simple conversation had sparked a ripple effect, changing lives and perspectives. Barron realized that small acts of empathy could lead to monumental change, and it was those connections that truly mattered.